We all love telling stories, from specific ones that have personal significance to each of us, to others that move us as a collective. Storytelling transcends cultures and identities, but at the same time, storytelling can have varying impact and importance from one culture to another. For Arabs, storytelling in terms of oral tradition and oral history has been the major method for sharing and preserving knowledge, wisdom, and identity, only truly replaced in the fairly recent past by the written word, and even more recently by the visual, or let's say, performing arts. But without it, where would the Arab identity be? Where would Arabs find themselves in understanding who they are both from a spiritual and an identity perspective? The power of oral tradition is a common trait of many ancient civilizations. Many moved on from this manner of relaying the knowledge of humanity as technologies to document information moved away from a dependence on human abilities that put great demand on human memory, that imposed a regimented practice of verbally extracting knowledge from ancestors. In a large part of the world, with the invention of the printing press, written form became the only means to transfer knowledge from one generation to the next. In the Arab world, though, this transition happened much later, and for many reasons. The obvious reason was widespread illiteracy in the general public up until fairly recently. Another significant reason was that a large portion of Arab peoples were nomadic, were very lean with their material possessions, hence discounted carrying any written form. Oral tradition was also one of the sole forms of entertainment licensed in the Arab world, and hence it was sticky in its gripping of audiences, be them in the center of cities or the vast open deserts. And all these factors contributed to oral tradition being an effective part of the Arab world right up until the middle of the 20th century. Even with its eventual decline and virtual disappearance from practice, the oral tradition's impact today is greatly witnessed within the Arab experience. Arab history and the telling of its stories were solely relayed through oral tradition up until history for the Arabs was appropriately documented through the written works by Al-Waqidi and Al-Tabari in the 9th and 10th centuries. The same applied for oral tradition as the foundation for the preservation and subsequent documentation of the Qur'an, Islam's holy book, and even more so with the Sirah an-Nabawiyyah, the biography of the Prophet Muhammad. Without oral tradition, we wouldn't have a comprehensive and unified Qur'an. No hadiths, guidance of the Prophet, would have survived the centuries. I think to really understand the influence and power of oral tradition in protecting Arab historiography and the lexicons of Islam, one must look at the substantial durations that oral tradition persisted and endured in relaying the contexts such as the chronicles of Arab events and peoples, as well as the transferring of the Prophet's biography. For example, when we consider the latter of the two, the Sirah an-Nabawiyyah, the first iteration of this comprehensive written work only comes over a century after his passing with the works of Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri and Ibn Ishaq in the late 8th century. And with this documentation, we clearly witness the noteworthiness of oral tradition with the listing of the chain of oral transmission that is associated with each key event or report recited. The same applies for the poetry and epics of the pre-Islamic world in Arabia, when the depictions of societal structure and behavior, tribal genealogy, and warring eras were captured through an orality that was very specific to the region. But with these oral expressions, even longer durations pass. Several centuries elapse without their recording in written form, and their perseverance endures as these stories are strictly told orally. Stories like Sirat Antar ibn Shaddad, Sirat Dhat al-Himma, Sirat Bani Hilal, and the Sirat al-Tahir Babers. One can pose the question, isn't this the same transition with any oral tradition around the world? That it was necessary until it wasn't? What differentiated Arab oral tradition from others? Well, those are great questions. Let's answer them. There are several elements that set Arab oral tradition apart from other forms of oral tradition around the world. The first is the importance that Arab oral tradition places in identifying the genealogy of its peoples. Arabs in their stories, be them historic, religious, or both, utilized the oral form to clearly contextualize the origins of the hero or principle of the story, through the description of lineages that played a crucial role in establishing social status, resolving disputes, and reinforcing tribal identity. One of the most important written genealogical works by Hisham al-Kalbi in the 9th century was Jamharat an-Nasab, the genealogical collection. This treatise quoted the many oral stories that catalogued the ancestors of various tribes across Arabia, consolidated them into one reference book. Just to provide you with an understanding as to the extent of genealogy we're talking about, this register includes 35,000 Arab personalities dating back to before the turn of the 7th century. Another factor that distinguishes Arab oral tradition from others was its emphasis on poetry and poetic forms as the method of transmission. This includes different yet independently complex structures such as the qasida, odes, ghazal, lyrics, and mawal, vocal improvisations. Virtually all Arab oral traditions are either totally poetry-based or are a concoction of both poetry and prose. A final element that separates Arab oral tradition from others is the fact that oral tradition is synonymous with the Islamic faith. The Qur'an is only meant to be recited orally, with the written form to be treated as a reference. Muslim Arabs simply don't read the word of God, but they vocally express it. And hence the connection that Arab Muslims have with oral tradition is endless, in the sense that they unconsciously carry it with them throughout their past, present, and future. In the distant past, Arab oral tradition was, as with many other traditions, one that represented the telling of stories, both fictitious and genuine. For early Arab storytellers, meaning from the 1st century to the 6th century, this tradition focused on relaying aspects of tribal life, warfare, and noble attributes of the ancestral or contemporary peoples. This orality was necessary for the transmission of cultural values, social norms, as well as tribal stature of the time. In addition to being keepers of knowledge and wisdom, it wouldn't be strange for these Arab orators to partake in battles, not in actually taking part in the fighting, but to operate as a champion, to boost morale and rouse their tribesmen to battle with their powerful speeches, or their eloquent words could also be used to dishearten an enemy. Then, with the coming of Islam, as noted earlier, this oral tradition then took on the spiritual role of preserving Qur'an for several decades, and then more significantly, to relay the life of the Prophet and document the many lessons and guidance extracted from his biography that eventually led to the Sunnah. By the Middle Ages, this oral tradition started posing a problem for the faith, and that orality was based on individual expressions of words that could lead to different meanings. And then came about the necessity to distance the Prophet from the common poets and storytellers of the pre-Islamic period, to preserve the divine revelation and the Hadiths verbatim. And it was at the culmination of this era, when the Qur'an and the Sunnah were set in stone, that Islam's shift away from oral tradition began to take effect. It was essential that in order to effectively defend the claim of truth for Islam's canonical texts, even though ultimately oral in origin, all competitive storytelling about one's own history had to be looked down upon, and even, if possible, forbidden. And by then, the Arab orators of old, the shu'ara, muhaddithin, rawis, and hakawatis, were excised away from operating within the domain of the intelligentsia, the royal or ruling courts, and Muslim scholarship. Their realm was exclusively the domain of the streets of cities, and their audience, the eyes and ears of the common people. The epics, although still intertwined with historical fact and religious principles, appeared now more as pure entertainment and performance rather than the transfer of weighted knowledge. This state of oral tradition continued well beyond the Industrial Revolution and into the 20th century, when the storytellers found refuge in the cafes and alleyways of what were now cosmopolitan Arab cities like Damascus, Beirut, and Cairo. Until today, they are no more. Gone is the oral tradition in its original form, and gone is the expression of values and transfer of knowledge through Arab voices. Oral tradition still impacts the Arab condition today. Maybe not out in the open, but on subliminal levels that we can't see. Education in the Arab world is a prime example and seems to be caught in a limbo concerning oral tradition. One of the main features of oral tradition throughout history, but more importantly during Islamic times, was the necessity for memory and the ability of Arabs to record within their minds the detailed and exact recollections of religious canon and events. And once recorded, such texts were unchangeable. And this same method applies to Arab education today. Memorization without question is the way in which Arab students learn, whether within religious subjects or beyond. And this is a total shame. Orators in antiquity as well as in the recent past recollected and performed their storytelling, including much observation, analysis, humor, pain, mystery, and discovery, a rich and comprehensive system of creating and relaying ideas and stories. By applying the same exact method of oral tradition within Arab education today, couldn't students themselves learn to effectively and creatively relay ideas, thoughts, and emotions, thereby empowering their identity and expression? Today, in the information age, there is a great opportunity for Arabs to rediscover the long-lost art of oral tradition, to spread Arab culture, history, and values, as the means available today are much more vast, easy, and powerful than ever before. Arabs want to hear stories that tell them about their history, culture, and condition, as do those that are attracted to the Arab world and people. Encouraging a new version of Arab oral tradition can only result in becoming better understood. That can then lead to the garnering of more acknowledgement and sympathy from those that don't relate to or know of Arabs and their identity. There are a large group of people out there ready to listen. At the same time, there are those who have great knowledge of Arab culture, history, and tradition. But the question is, are they willing to raise their voices?